Well, welcome everybody to our next podcast. We've asked Antony to come along to share with us. They sort of talk about hallucinogenics and magic mushrooms and microdosing and all kinds of things. And I'm not an expert in any of that. I've done a fair bit of it in my life, and had some pretty bad times, some pretty good times. But I think Antony's taken it a lot further than I did, and he had quite an experience with ayahuasca. Is that the pronunciation?
Ayahuasca, yeah, or yahe, as they say in South America, but as we know it, ayahuasca. Yeah.
And so I don't know many people have gone that far into an experience. I mean, the experiences I had of hallucinogenics was kind of handfuls of it with your mates drunk at parties and LSD, so I've not really got any constructive experiences. A lot of destructive ones I can share, but again, being sort of in recovery and the recovery theme to it, because as it is becoming more popular and more talked about, some people are going to think about it, so it's probably good to be well informed before you try and do anything. So, you know, I've asked Antony along to share his experience of that process, and then we'll probably ask some questions, but we'll see how it goes. So welcome Antony. So
thank you.
So maybe you could tell us, I think you have been on a podcast before, but I guess you could give us a little bit of background and sort of what led you to sort of the idea of taking ayahuasca.
Yeah, I'm going to try to condense that and keep it in context for a recovery podcast. And I will try to condense it because I could probably talk now. So, as you know, I went through your treatment centre. I think I left there 12, 13 years ago. And for 5 years I was fully immersed into the fellowship after leaving treatment. And, you know, a really contributive, participating member of the AA fellowship, and lived a life of complete abstinence. And I guess that the turning point was when I went backpacking by myself, and I boarded a plane to Thailand. That I started drinking at that point, but my point is that if I was in recovery, if I continued and maintained my spiritual growth in recovery, I don't think I would have touched or entertained the idea of psychedelics or ayahuasca or anything of that nature, because of the recovery mindset would have protected me from that.
Was you planning on going away and drinking? Was that kind of part?
No, I stopped going to meetings about a month before. I think it was about 3 weeks before my flight. Did
you think you were kind of fixed, or you just had enough, or just want to get on with your life?
If you was to take the paragraphs on the big book, it would fit perfectly with that. It's a true reflection of what it says in the big book, to my experience. Yeah. That I was done, I had landed, I had made it, I don't need it no more, I was fixed. And I went into treatment for heroin and crack addiction. Alcohol was never a problem for me. Yeah. So that's kind of how it went. I never went back to heroin. Just
for people that might be sort of having them same... Did you have thoughts of that within that 5 years, that maybe you could drink, or drinking wasn't a problem? Was that sort of dialogue and inner dialogue, or...?
No. I mean, it might have been a very fleeting odd thought, but nothing of great significance that made me white-knuckle it, as we say. I can honestly say that being fully immersed into the fellowship for those good few years, I felt in a position of neutrality, as it says. Yeah. And then reflectively also of the programme, when I stopped going to meetings and stopped calling my sponsor, within the space of 3 short weeks after 5 years, I found myself with a glass of whiskey at Heathrow Airport boarding the plane. And the funny thing is, it talks about in the big book, and I never got this, but again, the big book became my experience, and it says we maintain a spiritual discipline somewhere along the lines of, I think it's on page 89, and it keeps us protected from fear, anger, worry and excitement. Now, excitement always struck me out like, well, I can get the fear, anger and worry, but excitement's a good, nice emotion. But I can honestly say it was excitement, I think. was the driving, acknowledgeable emotion that I drank on.
It also says you have a vague sense that it's sort of not too smart what you were doing. Did you have that?
Definitely, I can't deny it. Yeah, I think it would be completely inaccurate if I didn't say that. I knew it wasn't smart.
Yeah.
So yeah, anyway, that's kind of where it led to. And when I was in Thailand, I ended up in a jungle and I did some magic mushrooms in a recreational party way. And nothing really came of it from then, and I think it was 3 years.
Was you sort of partying around Thailand? Was that part of the image of you that you wanted to be in with a certain crowd? And
if I'm honest, I didn't go over there with that intention, and it wasn't my overall experience. I did go to the full moon party just because it was just one of those things that I wanted to do. I was in Thailand, and I went to the full moon party, and I was there for about 2 hours. I didn't like it. I grew a social anxiety over the years, and to be with 300,000 people on the beach was not my idea of fun. I was there for about 2 hours. But I did get a boat out to this little island in the middle of the night where there's some locals, and that's where I tried magic mushrooms. But other than that, it was really a cultural experience, and I did a lot of, just by myself with my backpack, going off and trying nice foods, going around the temples and stuff like that. And there was a little bit of partying, but it wasn't my overall overwhelming experience. I didn't get drunk every day or anything like that, but it was the beginning of a path that was the opposite of a recovery and abstinence-based life.
Yeah.
And then in terms of the psychedelic path, because it was a path, it was a journey, and it was a space of about 6-7 years that I was interested and participated in. I can only say ceremonies. I would never say a recreational party because it was never like that. But I was speaking with Matt on the way here, and they talk about the butterfly effect. And what happened was me and my wife, we laid in bed one night with the iPad, bored, Netflix, flicking through what's on, and this documentary really struck me. It said DMT, the spirit molecule. So I read the synopsis. I was like, that looks really interesting. I watched it, and it was about an hour long, and it was so interesting, and there was something, and it was probably the same curiosity and mindset, and probably a degree of stupidity that led me to smoking cannabis at the age of 13. That the same feelings led me to. And when I watched DMT, the spirit molecule, it was about psychedelics, but predominantly it was about ayahuasca and the key ingredient in that, which is dimethyltryptamine, i.e. DMT, as people would recognise it or know it. And it was that documentary I knew after watching that I was blown away by it. I was like, wow, I want to have that experience. Initially, I thought I would have to fly to the Amazon and spend £5,000 or £6,000.
Just to hold you there a minute, just to sort of back it up a bit, because you were in recovery for 5 years.
5.5 years.
And so a big part of that in 12-step recovery is that we have spirit ritual experiences that we should have, like I did myself. I had experiences, with the spiritual, with God, and with maybe other things I don't know. But again, I was having quite a rich spiritual experience just through my recovery and my spiritual practices, my meditation, my seeking, my looking at myself, that kind of thing. Did you have a spiritual experience through that period before you reached that point in the airport? In
recovery?
Yeah. You had a
fellowship.
belief in God or...
100%. 100%. In fact, I went in with an attitude, even the initial days and weeks of completely open-minded, that I don't know anything about spirituality, and I'm willing to accept that there is a God, and I'm willing to explore a life. So that was like
a continuation of that for you at that point, as a another continuation of your spiritual exploration.
In fact, I would say that was a theme. Yes. Yeah. But and certainly I definitely would say, it's one of those things, isn't it? That how do you I was to throw around these words, spiritual experience and stuff, and I think as the time has gone on and the years have gone on, and I did like some years in the fellowship, and then I went off and did these very, very, I don't know what the word is, beyond all imagination, ceremonial psychedelic experiences. That now when I was like, if somebody was to say, did you have a spiritual experience? It's like that we need to have a conversation about what I now think that means. Yeah. But I would say in the fellowship, yes, I did have a spiritual experience. Yeah. And I think...
What would that have meant in terms of the fellowship?
In the fellowship?
Part of it, yeah.
Okay. It would... I think it's the continual seeking for something greater than myself.
When we mean self, it doesn't mean as a complete individual. It means as your ego self.
Ego self.
Not
yes.
Like,
yes. Yeah. There's something at work far greater than myself, with purpose and meaning, and I can be participating in that and seeking a more service-based life.
Yeah, because I think for those that don't know, the 12-step sort of fellowship and the sort of central theme of the spiritual experience is that what the root of all of our suffering is selfishness, self-centeredness, self-seeking. It's this over self-conscious that causes suffering. So to go beyond to being selfish and learning to be more selfless will bring a greater sense of ease and well-being. And so most spiritual teachings kind of have that theme to it, don't they? That
yeah, and I think that's it's really difficult, isn't it? You can only say it's my experience. I can only say it's my experience, but I would struggle to verbalise what exactly do I mean by self and ego and self-centeredness and selfishness. We could say like the immediate symptoms of that, like I want this and I'm most important, I want to be the centre of attention. But I think there's a deeper meaning to that, and certainly the spiritual experience over a long period of time that I had in the fellowship would probably be conclusive to being of service gives me a far better sense of well-being than being of service to my immediate needs and desires and so on and so forth. Fellowship, if we was to look at that down, to be supporting one another and serving a greater purpose.
Yeah, because none of it tells you to go and do ayahuasca or any other mind-altering. Ayahuasca, I guess, again, I don't know much about it in the makeup of it. I'm no expert, but you know what you hear is that it's not the same sort of drug as like heroin or cocaine. It's not addictive, but it certainly is mind-altering substance.
It's by far the most mind-altering substance that I've ever taken.
That's the bit that kind of interests me, is the mind-altering bit.
Yeah.
What alters your mind, and is it safe to alter your mind in that way? Does your mind need most people's minds need altering, but is that the best way of doing it? But so it's brought you to that. So you've definitely gone on a different journey once you've gone to Thailand and what you had up to that 5 years. And again, along the same sort of path, so I guess there was not a satisfaction in your recovery, that you felt there was more for you to gain, or that there's something that you still were seeking?
Oddly enough, there was great satisfaction in my recovery. There really was. But there was an overwhelming excitement and a feeling of like, wow. In fact, I remember as a heroin addict, for some odd reason, I watched, I don't know if you've ever seen The Beach with Leonardo DiCaprio.
Yeah, just recently.
I watched that movie, like when I was actively using heroin and, you know, sat in whatever bedsit or around my mum and dad's. And I remember watching that movie. I watched it a couple of times and thinking, like, you know, as they would say, crack pipe dreams of like, one day I'm going there. And after 5 years in recovery, coming from a heroin addict and all of the ramifications and the consequences of that lifestyle, I was working in education. I only worked 9 months a year. I had all those holidays. I had money in the bank. I was very healthy. I had 5 years complete abstinence. I think I'd only ever taken paracetamol for pain. That was the extremes of taking a mind-altering substance, even though you probably can put that aside in this context. And all of a sudden, I had booked a flight. I'd had the summer holidays off because I was working in education, and I was in a short few days boarding a flight and going to Bangkok. And I think it was the overwhelming excitement, and I was just stopped going to meetings, just stopped ringing my sponsor, and that's where it led to. But I was very satisfied with my life in recovery.
Yeah, at least consciously. Well,
I actually, the whole, at least consciously, but the whole lifestyle was good. I was with friends.
But I think like this, that often, I mean, I've met people that, again, they struggle with giving up alcohol because they have such a strong image of them drinking alcohol. It's like a fantasy almost.
I can relate to that, yeah.
That one guy, he just always dreamed of sitting in a pub, reading his newspaper and pontificating. He was quite intelligent in certain areas. But the thing is, that image, he couldn't let go of that image. So not drinking took away his kind of almost like his dream.
Yeah.
His dream wasn't to travel. His dream was to be in that pub at his 2-person table on his own with his newspaper, drinking his stout and pontificating. And some people I met that they want, it was like wine when they were cooking. That was kind of
that's
like
exactly
dream.
What I can relate to.
So
I
people,
always have this.
yeah. So to let go of their alcohol almost took away their whole image of what they were dreaming. I was just wondering that you're dreaming of Thailand or travel or, like you said, the film The Beach. To be a part of that fantasy. I hope it becoming a reality. That especially with alcoholics and addicts, that's the central part of it. They may not even admit it. They may not even know that until they sort of get into that place. So even though you were being the teacher and had the nice life, you obviously wanted to see yourself in that travelling image of Thailand, which again, I'm not saying it's good or bad, I'm just saying I think that's what humans do. I have dreams and visions and then I try and achieve them.
Yeah. I
think everything's like that. In actual fact, most books that you read, like The Secret and, self-development and even the AA book, it talks about contemplative meditation, that if you focus your mind, you can create your experience.
You'll create the reality, yeah.
Yeah, and to take it off the things that you're obsessed by. Like alcohol.
Yeah.
If that obsession's not broken, then you do keep assessing and finding your way back to that point, which again is like, I'd like to explore that more as we sort of go on with your story, because again, that's kind of the view that I feel that I take working with people in addiction, that how often they're trying to find a way back to safely drinking safely.
But not down the road that they came from, kind of swerving around in a deceiving way.
Yes. So, well, and because again, when you've been around 30 years, you get a lot of people that have been 10, 20 years in recovery calling you.
Yeah.
And saying, mate, exactly.
I don't know what happened.
I don't know what happened. It wasn't even in my mind, but I stopped going to meetings. I stopped doing my spiritual stuff. I just wanted to go to kids, getting on with my life. And and even wasn't even feeling bad. I was having a good time. But there was no mental defence whatsoever. The drug was put in front of me, and bam, and then the process began again.
Yeah.
And
one thing I can say is that even though I can't say, because I had a bit of a problem with alcohol. But I can't say it was like before I went into treatment 12, 13 years ago, because it wasn't.
No,
just wasn't.
You'd matured, you'd grown up, you're more self-aware. Yeah. So there was a lot of different elements in the mix.
Yes, but I think the more that you learn about the nature of alcoholism, and if you can but just say, this isn't about alcohol, it's not, you know, it's something deep within me, is that I was fully aware that it was deep within me. And even if I did only drink 2 nights a week, on a bad week I would drink 3 nights a week. But I was at home, you know, and I had this whole fantasy in my head that I was no longer the council kid. I was living in a private, you know, relatively nice house. Everything was really, really nice. And I was cooking fancy food, you know. And I built this whole fantasy in my head. And I had a glass of red wine, and it you know, it did. I was fully aware that it became problematic, because normal people don't get half a bottle, fill up the glass of wine to the top, and then drink all of that until it feels warm in your stomach, and then you polish off another bottle to ease you through the next 3 hours of the night eating your food. That's not normal.
But from that day in the airport, that took some years.
I would say that it took a year and a half to get to the point where I was doing that 2-3 nights a week. And
then how long till you kind of then realised, hang on a minute, this is sort of problematic again?
I think within 18
admit.
months, 2 years. And I tried to go back to recovery, and I did the odd meeting here and there, and so on and so forth. But I just couldn't get back into it like I was.
So let me go back. See, I remember getting emails, it must have been emails, I don't think there was WhatsApp, from you, going, oh, I found ayahuasca. It's like you become a real ayahuasca conspiracy for me, sort of. It was the silver bullet that everybody was missing, and it was fantastic. And so talk us through how you got into that journey, and then maybe how it started and how it progressed, and Ken, what you experienced, maybe, you know, the positives and the negatives of that journey.
So, for any listener that's may or may not be, and I'm sure, as we've said with the Google searches, and just from me speaking to people over the years, that there is a growing interest in psychedelics in the world of microdosing mushrooms and ayahuasca. And I also went off and for the record, I always did this in countries where it was legal, and it still is today. I flew to those countries, which is important. And I went to Holland, and I did ibogaine, which I think you may have heard of.
No.
Which is a plant from Cameroon and Gabon in Africa, which is actually showing really, really good results for treating heroin addiction. But let me elaborate on that from a recovery point of view a bit later on. That most people, like you said, you know, ayahuasca is a bit like, not many people have heard that. Everyone's heard of magic mushrooms. My mum and dad have heard of magic mushrooms. Everyone's heard of magic mushrooms. They're known as these things that make you see things that aren't there and make you giggle a lot. And there's some truth in that. But I would say that ayahuasca is like 1,000 times stronger and 1,000 times more alien than you could ever possibly imagine. The first thing I would say...
But it's not the sort of thing that you would go in your back garden and get, or buy from your mates, or grab a handful and chug them at a party.
No, it's probably important to say at this point that we had a chat the other day that I have seen some... Although I've only seen short periods of somebody's life on this, so I can't tell you the whole picture. Over the 6 years I met, if not a few thousand people in these ceremonies. But important to say that one girl flew over from France to a country where he was doing it, and she did 2-night ceremony, and I think 2 days after she hung herself with a scarf. So these experiences are...
That's not common though, is it?
It's not common, no, definitely not. And it is like one of these things that a lot of people understand the seriousness of it. And again, I'm not talking so much about mushrooms here, I'm talking about the ones that are... Because a lot of people are now microdosing ayahuasca and stuff like that as well. These experiences are not to be taken lightly, but my experience was, if, for example, you know, you'd have to fill out a big form before you go to these ceremonies.
Yeah, what was your first experience? And even like, how did you feel, you know?
It was quite mild. I walked away disappointed and quite pissed off that I'd spent quite all that money. But
how much would you be charged for that?
I think it was. I think I paid £190 for one night
And that
ceremony.
and just talk us through how would that work? You'd go to another country.
Yeah. I'd go to another country because in some countries it's legal. In some countries it's legal under religious grounds.
In England?
Not in England.
It's illegal.
I think the legal side is a grey area. It's hard to say where it's legal and it's illegal.
Yeah.
It's quite difficult because dimethyltryptamine, DMT, is in many of the plants of the trees that we see around us, but in far smaller and less quantities.
Well, you'd have to eat a whole oak tree.
Yeah. And again, there's a lot of science now that says this, but it literally is everywhere. Yeah. So it's really hard to put it in a legal framework.
Yeah.
Because you can't go and eat in some plants and stuff like that. It's hard, it's difficult.
So you've decided to fly off to another country to do one of these ceremonies that are kind of put on a weekend, are they, by certain
usually
groups?
a weekend. My experience always was, and this is a good thing, that you have to fill out a questionnaire beforehand. If you're on antidepressants or any certain medication, you'll just be refused because it's dangerous.
So there is a danger if you're. Is it because of the medication?
Yeah,
because
anything that affects your serotonin levels, so antidepressants, I can't even remember, beta blockers, a whole manner of things, then it would just be a definite no. And if somebody said yes, they're playing with fire, playing with people's lives and sanity. Yeah. If you had epilepsy, it was a no-go. Yeah. And a few other things as well. There was a strict diet to follow. Some people would go as far as don't consume any media, no sex for 2 weeks before. But the first time that I did it, it was really quite mild, and I was a little bit like, really? What was all the fuss about? But I did go and do it again, and the second time I did it, it seemed 1,000 times more powerful, and I walked out of there with my tail in between my legs, so to speak, and quite humbled. Well, I can't really tell you what happened, because you know the word ineffable.
No.
It's hard to coat in language in words.
Yeah.
And I think the reason being, I've thought about this lately from a Christian perspective when it says in the Bible about it surpasses all understanding, but that's another angle. But the reason I can't really tell you what happened, because in order to describe or explain something, you need physicality, you need a place, people, and you need time, and you need a narrative. But under a really deep ayahuasca experience, and even any psychedelic experience where it's full on, those things seem to not be there anymore.
Yeah.
So it then be hard to explain it, because to explain it, I need to say I'm at Leicester's house in Suffolk with Lester, with Matt, and it's a Thursday.
No, I get that. I had a spiritual experience like that without any chemicals, where I come out my body, and some of it I could kind of relate to normal language and normal experience. Not normal experience, but I could keep it within the framework of explaining the material experience. But then part of it, it feels like, even if I try and explain it, I automatically feel like I'm lying, because there's no real words or no context I can put it in to transmit it. But I can put it in for me to say that, like, I come out of my body and I ended up entering into an incredible amount of knowledge, an incredible amount of, like, I was understanding things that I'd never learned, and it just kept escalating. The more I come out, I could feel that my body was confining me into ignorance.
Yes.
And as I was coming out, and I met people when I got outside my body that were more spirit, went down a tunnel, all that kind of stuff. But again, I even think that was my mind just making sense of what I was experiencing. I felt like I went to the gateway of heaven, like a lot of people say, where you go down the tunnel and you see the beautiful earth. But then I think even that earth, even though it was beautiful and it seemed perfect, was still my mind trying to construct something to make sense to me.
The thing is,
did it like that?
100%, 100% like that. And I think There's a philosopher that I used to listen to years ago, and I listened to hours and hours of him because I was really fascinated by the way that he would, his philosophical view, and he touched upon such experiences, and I do believe as well that through certain breathing techniques that you can create these experiences in the brain. You don't need to take these psychotropic plants, you can, but he said a couple of things that were really profound. And the first thing he said is that taking things like ayahuasca or San Pedro or peyote or iboga or anything like that, or even a large dose of magic mushrooms, it's like putting 1,000,000 volts for a 12-volt battery.
It's like short circuit.
It's like short circuiting, and I think you have to be very careful with that. And I don't think that going back to drug addiction is as much of a worry as clinging on to your own sanity is.
Yeah, and there's a school of thought which I'm probably one of, but again, I've not got thousands of people as experiences. Only, if I was to come down on what I believe through my journey and my life in addiction, would be that a lot of people also believe that kind of experience isn't as valuable as the lived experience, as the doing it through them other practices.
Well, this brings me on to my next statement made by Alan Watts, and you've just kind of hit the nail on the head there. And the first thing he says was be careful, because that's really an accurate analogy, if you like. It's like putting 1,000,000 volts or a 12-volt battery in the brain. My makeup that I go into it with is not quite ready for that. But the statement too that he said, and this really hit me, it did. He says you have to be really careful about unearned wisdom. So, for example, those 5 years in recovery was a slow 5 years. That's about 1,500 days of meetings, of many conversations, of doing service, of doing 3-4 step fours, maybe one a year, and trying to improve a conscious contact with God through prayer and meditation. And it was a very slow, gradual and earned spiritual path, and the results were the results of my participation and my action and my effort. But fasting for 2 weeks and not watching the media, and then going and laying on a bed and drinking this vine juice from the Amazon jungle and having all of that insight and that wisdom and that otherworldly and otherrealmly information can be shocking. So much so.
See, because I think even in the 12-step program, the purpose of it is to give you that experience. And there's in the back of the book is a couple of pages called spiritual experience, which they put a correction in because the founder of he had a very similar experience of the outer body, where he sort of felt like he was on the mountain in the wind and all the knowledge and understanding, and when he come back, I think that helped him on his journey. But they felt that everybody needed that immediate vast outlook, that psychic change that happened quickly. But in that spiritual experience, they put that was an erroneous presumption of theirs. That he said that actual fact most people don't have that experience.
I don't think most people should either.
No, and he says, because again it doesn't lessen the experience. It says that most have an experience which William James or Herbert Spencer, I can't remember which one, it's more of an educational, like an earned variety. See, I found I had that experience, and it was like sort of coming out of a very uneducated, incapable, very limited vessel, which was my body and my mind, into this amazing amount of information. It was like sort of coming out of an Amstrad into an Mac. It was like you say. It was a.
People often refer to it as the Akashic records.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying that's the reality, but I'm saying that people have an experience that they need to give some sort of language framework to, and that's probably where the phrase Akashic.
But the thing is, I realised that when I come back into my body, I was, even though I'd had the experience, which I think was beneficial, my ability to understand that experience was still very limited. That was where I then had to go on the educational. So I found the people that haven't had that experience, or the people that have had it, we still both got to do the educational bit to develop the capacity to understand the experience, because not everybody's got the capacity to understand. And I guess, so even yourself, like you're saying there, you've gone to this second ritual, you've been given the charge, you've come out into God knows where, and then you've come back into yourself, and you said, I think, tail between your legs, it was like an overload.
Well, I mean, to be honest, I would say that time, and I mean, I did it, I think 33, 34 times over the space of 7 years, which if you break it down, it's not doing it every weekend by any stretch of the imagination. And I actually said to Matt on the way here that not only are these, let's take ayahuasca, not only is it not addictive, I recall 2 times I booked a ceremony and rang up a few days before and said I can't come and I'm not doing it. I was too worried and a little bit like I'm not sure I should do that again. So it's not that. So it reverts back to what I said 5 minutes ago, that it's not so much reverting back to drug addiction, it's your mental health and your sanity. And human beings have this, a lot of us, and certainly me, have this naivety that if it sounds like you're going to go onto the spiritual hilltop of another realm, people are going to be queuing up outside the door thinking it's a good idea. And it ain't always a good idea. Because we don't understand what's on the hilltop and what that means.
Yeah, which kind of would be my argument about altering your mind. You don't know where that alteration's going to go, and again, it could be good for some people, but it could be severely not so good for others. But who knows? Who knows? So I guess even the second time, you could say that was a new experience. You was unaccustomed to it, and it was not a good experience. I guess what you're saying.
I would say it was a good experience.
It was.
The second, I was blown away that I could have that experience.
Yeah.
It was almost like such an experience. I could only say it was a spiritual experience, and it was like things that I had read, watched, and listened to were actually true, that people could have such experiences that were so otherwhelmingly, just leave you gobsmacked, and you can only say it was ineffable. I don't really know what to say about it. But again, balancing it up, because it ain't all bad. It was about a year and a half later, maybe the 7th time that I did it. I went to ceremony, I did the usual preparation, I did the fasting, with the same people that I can't say a bad word about them. I think they're doing what they think is right, and they do it very safely. I've seen on many, many occasions people show up and they haven't adhered to something, or they've lied about a medication, and they haven't taken the money of them. They said, we're really sorry, you can't be doing this. So I can't really say, I'm just saying it as it was. But the 7th time that I did it, I remember I was in this old house that was about 400 years old. It was absolutely stunning. It was in some countryside, without going into detail, and it was beautiful. And this is where it gets terrifying and so humbling, that over the space of about 2 hours, I drank these 2 cups of ayahuasca in the space of about 50 minutes. Usually you have 2 cups, some people will get up and have a third. And over the space of about 2 hours, and again, this is doing my best to try and explain something that's somewhat inexplainable. But the first thing that happened in a ceremony, you're in pitch black, and there's music and singing going on in the background, and that's called a Nikaros. And the first thing that happened as the ayahuasca took effect was I no longer had a name. That no longer existed. I knew I was in a body. I knew I was a human being.
You mean I didn't identify as yourself anymore?
Didn't identify as myself.
Yeah. So
Antony
ego,
couldn't come to my mind.
The I's gone.
It was starting to go.
Yeah.
It had a long way to go. But Antony no longer existed. But I knew I was in a body still. I knew roughly where I was. Still conscious. And again, there's no time frame in this, because time just disappears. So I'm just throwing some estimates out there. And within the space of an hour, that went. My memories started to go, so my family was no longer reality in this experience, my status, my job role. But then it started to get to the next level, and this is where I was really regretting.
So you're completely losing yourself, you'd say?
Completely losing myself.
Yeah.
It was vanishing, and I didn't like it. So queuing up, thinking that you're going to go to the spiritual hilltop,
But I guess they
for
say
me
that
was a silly idea.
Best they would say that your ego doesn't like that.
Yes. Yeah, you could say that. And again, that sounds all spiritual, but in the experience, you're jumping off a cliff onto concrete ground might be terrifying, but this was something else.
I thought that was the point of the experience.
But then it got really, it went to the next level, and this where I was like, I wish I could say I regretted it, but regret didn't exist there.
No.
That my body had vanished when I was just pure consciousness aware. But I knew I was still on the world, and I'm not even exaggerating by this. I knew I was on the world, but I no longer had a body. Antony was far gone. The family, all memory had gone. But I was fully conscious in the same way that I'm conscious now, not just of the reality as I know it now. And then the world disappeared. And the blackness of the universe changed, and there was this nothingness. But there was something. In fact, there was just as much as something as there is now, but it was so vastly different and so vastly alien to anything I know that I have to say it's ineffable.
Yeah,
and it was terrifying. I crawled out of there 2 hours later, and I was petrified. And I said to this guy called Andrew, I am never fucking doing that again, mate.
But because I think that, again, just not saying good or bad, but spiritually speaking, that a lot of people believe that this world we're living in is the real nothing. And that what you were beginning to experience was the reality of existence. And in that nothing, because again, we're like something dwellers, that we're so attached to the material realm. Once we let go of the material realm, because there's a lot more nothing in the everything than there is something.
Yes, yeah.
But we don't know what the nothing is,
Yeah.
because we're so attached to the something, and that causes most of the suffering. So when you let go of the something, then you, but then it's that feeling that there is nothing, but there is not nothing. There really is something behind this material realm that we're all so attached to. And every religion believes that. Look, I'm a Christian, but again, I believe that, in the spirit. To me, that would be the spirit, and you're not your body. That's an illusion. It's a sick illusion that's not very healthy to have, because it causes all of the world's issues.
Yes.
So I believe in that spirit. But the idea of God is that most people experience God as nothing. It's like there is no God, because they've not had the spirit ritual experience. They've not developed the capacity to connect with the nothing, to let go of the something where the I no longer exists, and that we become part of the whole. So I like that analogy I usually use, where
the cup in the ocean.
The cup in the ocean. That if the ocean was the consciousness of the universe, and you put a cup in the ocean and take a cup of the ocean out, then the ocean would disconnect from the ocean in the cup disconnects from the ocean, and it starts identifying with the cup. But then at some point it gets tipped out of the cup and then goes back into the ocean and remembers it was the ocean all along. But of course, our sense of self, our reality, hates that, because it's like dying.
Clinging on.
Well, it's like you're dying, but it's like, well, you're dying to the material, not to what appears to be nothing.
Yeah.
So again, I think that's always super interesting, and again, for me, I love to work that out through my Christian practices.
Well, this is, it's at the end of the road. We talked about, coming down this road and then going straight back. Well, I certainly have done this kind of road, but at the end of the road, I came to Christ. And now I know, being half educated, a bit globally and religiously aware of what the world is about historically, religiously, and what's on offer, if you like, that Christ is that's it. Christ is at the end, and this is where I found, at the end of myself, I found Christ.
But backing that up to that experience, so you had that experience, you said that was only the 7th time.
Yeah.
So you still...
There was I think there was a 5 or 6 month gap after that. Then I was on hand on my heart. Out of all of my life's experiences, nothing terrified me as much as that experience.
But you still went back.
I still went back and did it.
But that's interesting.
Because I was intrigued, yeah.
Yeah, so what happened then? Because again, I guess you have these experiences and then you come back into your body and then you kind of process it.
Yeah.
And then something says, go again. Because you said how many times did you do it? 30?
Over 30, about 32, 33 times.
So what of significance happened on the other journeys that you went on?
There was all as powerful as the one before.
So you kept going back to that?
Yeah, I kept going back, yeah. And,
but was you getting more familiar with it, or was you still just as afraid?
Well, you think you get more familiar with it, but you just don't. Because there's this strange experience where you come out of the body, you enter this realm that is so utterly beautiful, so utterly insightful, full of wisdom, and you see, I like this analogy that with a football pitch, you've got the spotlight. But at the back of the crowd, as the crowd and the stand goes up, you've got the fog light. And it's like in my normal consciousness state right now, I can see things from a spotlight point of view, from a spotlight perspective. But with ayahuasca, it's like you come into the fog light and you see more broadly, and I could see why things were like they were with my dad and my mum and our history, and why things were like... Let's put it this way. There was a level of empathy inside me that ayahuasca manifested me that I just wish I never had. And that's quite a common theme, actually, that it births an empathy that, do you know what, I don't even want that. Empathy is a good thing, but that's just so much so that you go into a place of sorrow for other people.
Because you know, just before we get to that bit, I just want to back up a little bit. Because again, in that experience, if you're out of your body, then most of what we feel is in our body. So when you're out of your body in that experience, did you feel fear? And if you felt the fear, where do you think that was coming from? Do you understand what I'm saying?
I know exactly what you're saying, and this is where we're going to go to a bit deeper now, and I can only say from a Christian perspective, that I think you're pirouetting around an area. It's either one way or the other.
I wasn't trying to be legal.
No, I know.
I was just trying to figure out.
I
was just trying to figure out that you express like physical emotions.
Yeah.
And then I was just wondering whether you said you went into a place where it was all beautiful and blissful. Mm. So again, we must be experiencing that or feeling that in some way. But then I was just wondering, was that? Again, I'm just trying to say, was the fear still attached to yourself, or did you get beyond yourself where you didn't have that attachment, then the fear left?
I think the fear would come and go. I mean, there's a well-known thing with ayahuasca, and I was always fortunate enough that the facilitators, in fact, I even did it with a lady that flew over from the Peruvian mountain. She flew over a few times to this country where we did it, where it was legal, and we did it with her. And there was always a safety net, and the facilitator would always say that if it gets too much, open your eyes and just walk, because and then it will become like a trippy mushroom experience. Yeah. But the real journey lies when you lay down with your eyes closed, because when your eyes are closed, the physical world is shut off, and you can go into the world that's deep down in your psyche. Yeah. And that's where the magic happens, or the journey happens. But no, the fear was still there in some respects. And again, it's hard to say, Lester, because it was just such an experience. You come back, you struggle to put the pieces of the puzzle together. It's very, very... but, like I said, with that 7th time, I can't say there was anything else but fear. No. That was not fun. It wasn't beautiful. It was not fun. I don't know what happened.
I just wonder why you kept doing it then, because I guess that's not what people are looking for. But no. I'm thinking that I've known a lot of people that have done the ayahuasca in recovery, from around these parts and from other areas, different groups. That always seem to be looking for something, which again I just personally didn't feel I I had that. I didn't feel that I'm looking for anything anymore. I feel like I'm just developing what I found.
Yeah.
And I feel they're still kind of seeking something. But, I forgot where I was going with that one. It's the trouble when you talk about this stuff, your mind as well.
You can go off and it can get really,
especially because you go into these otherworldly experiences, it's not kind of so solid in your memory.
I think, like, in terms of, like, looking for...
Oh, sorry, what I was saying is the reason that I think a lot of people that I understood what they were sort of expressing while they were doing it, or what was kind of being promised, is it was almost this, again, the 12-step program is saying, look, self is the root of your problem. It's causing all your suffering. So the program helps you to get out of self in a spiritual way. But it's a way that you have to manually work for. There's no drug to take. And like you say, a lot of people I think that doing the DMT or something like that will short circuit that journey for them. But again, I think with people with addiction, I just always had this suspicion, because again, I understand that, you know, a lot of people that with addiction haven't fully conceded that they can't be, that they need to remain abstinent. Now again, a lot of people go, well, I won't abstinent, and everybody's got their own journey, but just from the 12-step point of view of people that are like, I'd say are like me, that they look for any form of deception, any way back to the drinking or the drug taking that's safe. And so a lot of the guys that I've talked to have said, look, when you talk to them, that it makes you face yourself, the things that really our 12-step program is designed to do. But a lot of people want to do the 12-step program, even them that are in it.
Yeah.
Because there's things in themselves, and I get it all the time, it's so abhorrent, whether it's their child abuse or the abuse that they've caused other people or their own children. It's so distressing and traumatic and abhorrent to them that they do everything to avoid facing themselves. So I don't think they ever get good recovery as a result of it. And usually when they've crashed again 10, 20 years later, then they get on the phone to somebody like me, where it's like, you always go there to that deeper place. It's like, look, what aren't you talking about? And sometimes they're quite, I say, look, your subconscious is conscious, and I can see your subconscious when you're talking to me, because I've learned to go into my own. And it's like going in the cellar. And so a lot of people have sort of expressed that doing them kind of ceremonies was a way of getting to, it forces you to face yourself, the darker side of yourself.
Yes.
But see, I'd say that a lot of them, I feel, and again, this may be my judgment or my experience or just what I believe, that they think, because again, it's like the EMDR, and everyone going, oh, EMDR, you're an alcoholic because you've got trauma. So then an alcoholic, a true alcoholic or true addict would go, so if I get rid of my trauma, I'll be able to use and drink again. And so it happened with the CBT, and you've watched these certain things that said, oh, these are the reasons. It's your childhood issues is why you relapse, it's why you drink, why you behave that way. And then in their mind, I think they think, if I deal with the trauma, then I'll be able to drink again. I'll be able to take drugs. So I have seen a lot of guys go through these journeys and return to drinking. Now, I don't know the outcomes of all of them, but I do know a lot of them fell out of recovery, and I expect that they're going to pop up some point as the years go by, as you did and other people.
Yeah.
Just wondered, would you think there's any validity in that?
I would say, from my experience, I was in recovery, and I started drinking before I became aware of ayahuasca. So my journey was reflected as to what it says in the big book, that if you do the steps, this will happen. If you stop doing the steps, this will happen. That's what happened with me, both steps of the process. And then I started doing ayahuasca. I didn't really do magic mushrooms. I think I did them once or twice, so I can't really talk about them. But I didn't go into ayahuasca with the aim of stopping drinking. I didn't do that. I went in with curiosity, and I think you just hit key word, shortcutting to a spiritual experience. That when you watch, because on YouTube there are some fantastic documentaries, and they make it sound like you're going to go meet the creator of the universe, and all you got to do is part with a bit of cash, do a bit of a fast for 2 weeks, and go and lay down.
But I guess some people,
And
that
some
is
people
their
are very
experience.
attracted to that.
And that is their experience. I guess some people, because I guess you've had a mass experience, because you say you've met sort of thousands of people on
Yeah.
that same journey. So I guess you've seen people in different
So
phases of that, good and bad, and
Yeah.
in different.
and the problem is I can't give you a viewpoint and opinion on someone's journey of going into recovery and saying, look, this person came here and 5 years later this is where they are, because I would only meet people here, there and everywhere, so I can't give you a whole picture. But what I did actually see some positive things come from it, and especially I think this is still being studied now in Holland and in Canada, with heroin addiction being the success rate, and if we're going to say success as complete abstinence, that in recovery, like for me, it's pretty good if you do what the program says. But the way that governments, even around the world, to my knowledge, are trying to treat heroin addiction is futile. They just don't know what to do. The best thing they can do is a methadone prescription. It's very, very difficult to get people off heroin. But Ibogaine has incredible results of doing one or two, and you don't have to. You only have to do it once or twice. But the point is maintaining it. And when I did Ibogaine, it was quite astonishing at what that did to my brain. I remember I was in Holland. I did this Ibogaine. I went to the airport, and the trip lasts. I don't. You say it's a trip. It was just so out of this world. It was incredible. But I was probably under with a blindfold on in this really big, beautiful house with 8 people that had come from all around Europe, and it lasted for about 32 hours. And then when I was in Schiphol Airport, the first thing that became, they say that it's like, this is why it was good for treating heroin addiction, because it wipes the database of the brain clean and gives you a fresh start to reset some new pathways. And that was my experience. When I got back, I was able to say, do you know what, I want to cut out coffee. I stopped drinking coffee for 7 weeks. I said, I'm going to stop doing this. I stopped it with ease. I'm going to stop doing this. I stopped it with ease. It was really, really bizarre. Like, all my memory was still there. There was no brain damage, but there was absolute newfound control to say, I am doing this and I'm not doing that. And that's why I think... But the problem is, can one maintain that? I don't know. Certainly for a good few months, I had a newfound
Not
control.
with coffee, by the look of it.
Not with everything. So that's my point. I don't know. Maybe an ongoing care.
But again, that's not a new thing, because again, going back to what I know about the 12 step, even on Joe Rogan had Russell Brand on there not so long ago talking about this sort of stuff, which is one of the reasons we sort of thought of doing this podcast. But they kind of Joe Rogan mentioned that Bill Wilson, the founder of AA, him and his wife Lois, he said he was doing LSD. He wasn't really doing it. What it was that they were trying to produce the psychic change in people. That's why LSD was kind of developed. And again, so they I think, a couple of times in the AA booklet, people went to like Carl Jung and he said, like, I'm trying to produce a psychic change in you, but I don't know how to do it. But what they realised through following the 12 steps, that did produce a psychic change. It did for me. And again, I've had a lot of experiences.
As well. I can reflect the two, and it did for me.
Yeah, I had to do a lot of drugs to get to that point, I guess. After say like I'm like a shaman from Watford, you had to drink like 50 lagers, handful of LSD, eat a curry, have a shag and a fight, and you see God. It's like a Watford shaman. We didn't have any frogs to lick. But I think it's that. But so that was a hospital experiment because they knew that they'd seen the miraculous change in him. Because I think it was with Carl Jung that he said this. He said that this guy named Ebby. He said that He said to me, look, I've never seen anybody of your variety recover. And he said it felt like the gates of hell slammed shut on me. He said, but there is an exception, but I'm a man of science. He said, I've seen these people that have had these, what they called religious conversions.
Yes.
They sort of become born again Christians or something, and that causes such a shift in their mind that they manage to stop drinking and taking drugs. He says, and I've been trying to reproduce that in you without the God bit.
Yeah.
And so that happened to Bill Wilson. He had this experience that gave him this big shift in his consciousness that enabled him to not drink alcohol anymore. Didn't make him a perfect person by any stretch of imagination. And so they asked him to go into this experiment where they were developing LSD, because they knew that LSD did help create that. And so him and his wife did it for a short period, but then there's no real... somebody out there may have more information, but I could never find... They just stopped it. He said they just stopped it. Whether he stopped it because it worked, or he stopped it because it didn't work, or he thought it was, not beneficial to other people, or what, I don't know.
Well, I would say this is that I think these things have served their purpose. These so-called experiences under hallucinogens, whatever they may be, there's quite a few that the world has to offer. But when you cross a certain kind of experience from taking a certain amount, and sometimes it's not even the amount that you take, it's the person that's taken them. It's not like certain drugs where the more you take, the more you're going to feel it. It's not quite like that. But the experience isn't that helpful when it's over and you're back in the body, and then you're stuck with dealing with the world and yourself again.
And probably ill-equipped to do
and ill-equipped.
Yeah.
And in some ways, it'll probably make it worse. So they probably serve a purpose by shortcutting and evidencing that experience exists. But how do we implement and integrate and in a practical way that's useful to everyday people in an everyday way without taking chemicals, substances, plants, cactuses, whatever?
Yeah, well, even if that was for some people, I guess, I even noticed that in Canada, see, in England and in Watford with my mates, it was pretty much like that. You'd drink like 20 pints of lager, take a handful of LSD, have a terrible trip, and they'd all be there to torture you and make it worse, thinking it's funny. But when I went to Canada at the time, on this beautiful island, where they did LSD, and I did LSD and mushrooms, different kind, more from Mexico than back then. But the difference is, it was more mindful. It was mindless. A lot of what we did in England, and still are, I think, is kind of mindless. It was more mindful. Now, I don't kind of want to be a complete advocate of anyone doing that, but at the same time, I don't really know enough about it to give a complete opinion either way. I can give you with the knowledge I've got and the understanding that I've got. But even in Canada, most of them, somebody wouldn't do it. Like they say there, it was more a bit of a ceremony, even though it was amongst friends. They'd have somebody that wouldn't take the LSD.
As a facilitator.
And a guide, and just somebody to, if you are having a panic attack, they could look after you and help you. Which again, that really stood out to me of not my experience in England. It was very abusive, really.
Yeah.
And again, I think it was happening on a very broken mind to begin with. And I think that's a great point that you make, that it's okay having, it's like why we protect children from certain experiences, because they're not able to process it.
Yeah.
And I think if you can't process an experience, that's what most dysfunction is. It's not able to process experiences, to grow and learn from them.
Well,
which I think, again, I've learned that through my spiritual practices. It's given me a process that I can work through, very uncomfortable, very frightening, very difficult. It doesn't have to be out of body, you know, into the nothingness and in the face of God. You know, some of the most difficult experiences I work through is in a room full of people where two of them don't like me and I've done something wrong. You know, that's incredibly uncomfortable and painful.
It's uncomfortable and painful, but it's also practical and reality, and in this realm, and something that you can integrate and transmit as a helpful thing to your fellows.
So when you're going out, and most people can't get that bit right, so going outside of your body into the universe, that's infinite.
Yeah.
I can see how that can cause some...
Well, there's two key...
I love it. I think that's fantastic, all that stuff. I just find the everyday stuff is very interesting, but it's a bit mundane.
Yeah.
So, you know, I do like, again, I'm glad that, again, my belief, my faith also gives me access to the eternal. And so I can go into the eternal. I'm not limited to this body anymore.
Well, it's really interesting, and I think this is something that's had me awake many a night, just laid in bed, just wandering out of like real philosophical inquiry into things, because I've always been that way inclined, thinking about deeper things. You know, I'm never really interested in Liverpool FC versus Man U, or what's happening on home and away, or anything that does. Maybe I'm quite envious of those people sometimes, because they seem quite happy and content, but I've just got no interest in it. But the first thing is, there's always a two phrases that you would hear in any sort of ceremonial and respectful way of doing psychedelics, and it's set and setting. And the set is your mindset that you go into it with. That has to be right. So you can't go in if you're just grieving somebody, or you're just lost your job, or you're anxious about this. Then going into a ceremony, a psychedelic ceremony, is probably not a good idea. And you're never going to be perfect as a human being. There's always something going on. But if there's something that's really weighing down on you, wait and do it another time. And then the second thing is the setting. So the people, the facilitators, the shamans, the environment. There's often loads of incense, there's candles, everything. And if you can get those two things right, you've got a good chance at having an experience that's not going to traumatise you. And then I think the second thing is, I've always liked that stuff. And I like this, mate. It's like when you got the message, put the phone down. And I went into it with a curiosity of bypassing, of shortcutting to such an spiritual experience that fascinated me. Like, does that exist? Because if it does, I want to experience it. And I did quite a few times. I just didn't put down the phone for 33 times. Because it was almost like, that can't be real, even though I know I experienced it a month ago. It can't be real. No, that was just my mind. And then you do it again, you're like, it's definitely real. But I think the point is that there comes a point where you say, I'm in this body, I'm in this world, it's an imperfect world, life is challenging, it's hard, my relationships are hard, you know. And the funny thing is now we've got some really deep stuff going on at the minute. You know, my wife's mum is in hospital having her heart monitored. And as you know, we've had a bit of a tricky time with her father and stuff. And there's a challenge right in front of me. I don't need to alter my consciousness. I just need to be, you know, do the best I can day by day and try and make
maybe
this
the attitude a bit.
Yeah, just I don't know. Just there's a reality in front of me, you know, and chop wood and carry water.
So I guess it comes down to using. So what would you say that? So not necessarily using drugs, but also using techniques, using people, using, you know, to develop and manage that stuff. But again, I feel like we were just jumping ahead a little bit to go to that point. It'd just be interesting to know. So when you come to the end of, you said, was that when you said putting the phone down? Did that mean you sort of on your 33rd time of using it, you thought that's it now? That's
well, it's interesting that you say that, because it was 3 years and 1 month ago, 2 months ago, We're in April just about, aren't we? So 3 years and 2 months ago that I became a Christian, I gave my life to Christ. I think it was 4 or 5 months after that, I did my last ayahuasca ceremony. I booked for 2 nights, because often you'd go for a Friday night and a Saturday night, you would do 2 nights. I went to this place, and it was the first time since giving my life to Christ that I had done it, and it was about an 8-month gap since I had done it previously. Anyway, I went to the ceremony. I was now a Christian. I didn't know what entirely that meant, and I was growing in an understanding.
Again, could you just back that up a little bit? Because that seems interesting, and I'm sure it will be to other people. How have you gone through all of that and ended up being a Christian? What led you to
Being
to
a
that?
Christian?
Yeah.
Well, the experience was quite profound that maybe we'll go completely off topic, but I can only say that God pulled me towards Christ, because I didn't actively wake up and go seeking Christ. It just kind of happened in a very strange set of circumstances on a very rainy day where I felt I was being spiritually attacked, and it was really, really weird, if I'm honest.
In without you weren't on any.
I wasn't on anything, no.
But
I
you was
took my
having
son to
quite a
school that
profound
day,
experience.
and I was shaking with nerves, and it was something that was new to me. I would always say that I had strong mental health. I never suffered with anxiety. I knew, as far as I knew, I was in really good physical condition. I took my son to school one morning. It was about 8:30. It was a very rainy day. Walked across the road, and I didn't quite feel right, but I didn't really pay too much attention to it. I dropped my son off, came out to school, and I was shaking like that. And for the first ever time in my entire life, I walked into a doctor's for my mental health because I was that scared. And the receptionist could see that I needed to see a doctor. She says, "You've got an emergency appointment, come back in 40 minutes. And I went home, and I think I called you that day, and I gave my life to Christ. But I don't know what happened that day. And then, funnily enough, again, now we're going to go way off, so I'll come back in. 2 weeks after that, coronavirus hit. And for me, coronavirus was quite a traumatic experience. Not because I was so worried about catching the virus, but the way that the globe changed. It didn't really, the way I was made up, and probably somewhat am still made up, it really affected me. So I became a Christian through that experience, and I gave my life to Christ in that day. So I can't say that I actively went out to do it. It was a really weird experience, and here I am 3 years and 2 months later. But going back, 4 months after I gave my life to Christ, I booked a weekend ceremony. I drank ayahuasca, and for the first ever time, when it started to come on, I didn't like it, and I forced myself to stand up and keep my eyes awake on a sofa and just watch something on the phone until it finished. And I've never done it since. There was something in me, and I think it was the spirit that says, this is no longer for you. You've got to earn your wisdom, and you've got a relationship with God. And whatever exists out there will be accessible when I leave this body. For now, I've got a job to do.
So you use Christianity and your relationship with Christ to work that stuff out in your life for the last 3.5 years?
Yeah.
And how's that worked out for you?
Well, this is like a ongoing
Well,
journey.
because I guess
we do these.
I think when you go on them sort of journeys, then people obviously want to know, where's it going to end? Now, everybody will end up in different places. That's where you've ended up. But it's still part of that journey, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's kind of through all of them experiences, that's where you ended up. Because again, we're all looking for something.
We're all looking for something. Now, the funny thing is, I feel that if we're going to talk about the benefits of ayahuasca and iboga, I did San Pedro as well a few times, which was utterly profound experience. The most shocking one, and I did this a few times, was when you can really shortcut things and smoke dimethyltryptamine. Now, if I want to go into the realms of really interesting, and probably part of the reason that I was so interested in it was this reason, that science has proved for many years that DMT, dimethyltryptamine, which is the active ingredient in ayahuasca, is already in our brains and our lungs and our liver, and some of it is released when we die. They know this through various studies. There was a scientist at a university in Colorado that actually found this out in the last few years, although it was always alluded to. Certainly people like Graham Hancock was talking about it, and scientist Jeremy Narby, who wrote a book, Down the Serpent of the DNA, and this really caught my attention. So then I had these experiences, and I knew that these experiences were being induced by this chemical in ayahuasca called dimethyltryptamine, and I knew, because there was loads of scientific evidence, that my body's got dimethyltryptamine in it. And then Christ talks about going to the place that surpasses all understanding. I'm off to paradise. So if anything, those statements that a lot of us find like, you know, these religious experiences and less Christianity, heaven, you know, Christ said, I'm going to paradise, and all of these things, that wasn't far a reach of my imagination to think that this is truth. These are fundamental truths that the scriptures tell us, because I think I'd experienced. I'm not saying it was God. I'm not saying it was the devil. I'm not saying, but all I know it was certainly otherworldly, and it seemed just as real as this world and this reality. It seemed just as real, if not more real, and in some ways felt a bit familiar. It was weird. It was really weird.
So it's so your Christianity the same as your ceremonies. It's not just sort of go to church Sunday and be a good person. It is you're still developing.
It's a journey. I think it's a journey
into other worlds,
into other worlds. Yeah. But I think it lies down in myself. We said in one of the recent Bible studies, initially, prematurely and childlikely, you know, Christ is this man that walked the earth, and, you know, we have these silly memories from our school nativity plays of a donkey, and all of that's kind of like, might be in the scriptures, but that mindset about it is almost nonsense when you realise, or I'm starting to realise, exactly the fundamental and deep meanings about what it is to be in Christ and where it takes you in your own heart and your own mind. And I think the way that finds itself is in my experience in the world. The Bible becomes my experience in the world. And as for the otherwhelming stuff on ayahuasca, it's just, I think I've put the phone down.
Well, I think it is a kind of a difficult one, because again, when you're talking with people about that, you start telling them, look, you're not your body, you are a spirit, you have a soul, which is where your mind and your character and who you believe you are is, but you're not your body. But most people are so attached to their bodies that they have
foolish.
They have no clue of the spirit realm, because their mind is, and because they're so attached to who they think they are in their body, that's who they start living their life as, this being that's that they're getting the reflection of their body, thinking that's who they are. And I think when you actually start having a real spiritual experience through that teaching, and you start identifying more with who you are in the spirit, or the no thing, the nothing, you start having a very different experience and start seeing the world in a very different way. And again, you can't even tell it to people, because you just sound like a fool.
Yes.
But now they sound like a fool to me. The something dwellers, I call them. They sound like a fool when you listen to people talk about their life. It just sounds so foolish. Even keeping it down to, like, look, I say this to a lot of people a lot of times. I say, look, mate, you realise you're on a ball spinning in space. There's nothing above you. There's just a bit of dirt, a speck of dust, considering the size of the universe underneath you. Why are you worrying about your electric bill? Why don't you? Told me that yesterday when I got an email from Octopus. Why don't you want to go to Thailand? Why don't you want to live that dream? Why don't you? You know, you think it just all ends here. I know that's what the evidence of your body's telling you, but that's the truth of your body. Your body does end here. Your body's just dirt. It's just the earth. But you're more than that. That you're stuck in the finite, and there's a lot of fear in the finite.
There was a lot of fear.
Which is why I was interested, because once you discover the infinite, it takes the end off, and then it should remove most of the fear. And then, you know, so it's just sort of realising that these books and these teachings aren't just stories for that kids do at school or Christmas or whatever religion may tell you. Because it's, again, I don't think I agree with most Christians, because I think they limit it down to their physical experience, and it's like, it's not what it is, and it's not even about that at all when you start understanding it. It's more about the spiritual experience, not the physical experience. Anyway, I think that brings us to near the end now, but maybe I could go on talking a lot longer. There's so many
it
more.
opens up a can of worms, doesn't it, where you can go off, and I think that's my journey really, is that yeah, the you know, I kind of know that there's more, and I have to rely not on some quick fix, shortcut kind of ceremony that kind of leaves you still bewildered, still trying to grab onto fog. You know.
Some would say if you never did that, you never would have got there.
I wouldn't, no, yeah, and probably not.
That's
Yeah.
the conundrum of it all.
Yeah.
So again, I don't want to be the arbitrator of anybody going and doing that and thinking you need to do it, because I'm an actual believer that most people don't. Maybe some do. I don't know.
All I know is that these experiences are out there. They've been they've been used for thousands of years in some places. I think the Native Americans have been used in peyote for hundreds of years, and ayahuasca's been used for thousands of years. But one thing that I would say with an addictive mindset is, when you hear of this research in Toronto and Holland and, you know, Portugal, and, you know, psychedelics are having a great effect on mental health, or great effect on reducing anxiety for people with terminal illnesses, is that all of a sudden the addictive mind will say, well, I've got a terminal illness, I've got diabetes, and this is why I'm going to go take magic mushrooms. You know, cling on to that and find a reason for these experiences. You know, it's probably easy to do that for.
Well, they say the same about
recovery.
methadone, but, and you know, they say the statistics are good, but I don't see it with what I believe.
Yeah,
I see people getting stuck in a physical experience,
yeah,
and they're not going to get out of it. But they're the ones I worry about, and that, it's not everybody, but there's a large portion of people get consigned to get stuck in an experience, and I think that's hell.
yeah.
And that really bothers me, that I think that drug can do that to people. It's certainly to a fair few.
And so freely given out.
Yeah, it may help some people, but for some people it stops their growth.
In my experiences, I've not seen it help.
I like the non-chemical spiritual development.
Yeah.
Not that I'm against chemicals, and I don't sound like that. I think you should be incredibly cautious of them. I don't think most people know enough about them to know who it affects or who it doesn't affect. And like with anything that's mind-altering, it can take you down the wrong path. It depends where your mind's at. Again, we can go over that and maybe like to more in the future talk more about, you know, different people's experiences, but like everything, it's good to be mindful and it's good to be careful, and because again, when you're dealing with your mind, if it's anything like my mind, it's very delicate, and even too much coffee can send me over the edge and change my mood and start creating depression and anxiety. And
I think that would be the overall message as well, from a being careful point of view, and I've actually seen it with people that I know and in myself to some degree, and even to the point where somebody's committed suicide after taking psychedelics and having such experiences that we've just been talking about, is be careful of your mental health and your sanity, and really question if you want to be doing this. So it's up to people. People are grown up. The world has a lot to offer. People will make the decisions that they want to make, but there's potential risks.
yeah, and I guess it'd be wise to realise that hopefully we've demonstrated that, you know, again, have we or not, I don't know, because then my head says, well, if I never done all them drugs and alcohol, and would I have got to where I did in my life? Who knows? But what I found is that wasn't the answer for me. That actually having a good, strong spiritual practices, even though it might have gone on, taken a lot longer and been more difficult, and, you know, maybe had to suffer more than I would have on medications. I think that there is the journey is possible without that. For at least some people. Again, you don't want to condemn people that need medical assistance, but not everybody does.
No.
But they always defending them that do. But then what about them that don't? Again, it's not black and white either side of the argument.
No.
Again, I think it's how do we have a balanced view of the whole thing instead of this, like, you know, everybody being given methadone. I'm just not happy about that at all. No matter what the statistics say, I don't like the people that are necessarily putting the statistics together.
No.
But because, you know what, I'm going to leave it there. Any final word?
No, I think one thing that I would say is it's almost like this is what I saw with certain, and not so much mushrooms, but, you know, 6-7 years I was in with certain crowds. I went to a few different countries and had different experiences. It's like another culture. It's almost like a hippie movement, but they're not quite, you know. I even met doctors at these ceremonies. I've met lawyers, all manner of people, and then I've even met people that were coming to try and treat addiction. They're more of my background.
Well, there is centres just designed for that, isn't there?
Yeah. Certainly in Costa Rica, there's quite a few. But I think it kind of goes back in. It's I think it's very wise and reality to keep your feet on the ground. But a lot of people, they live in this world where their heads are above the clouds all the time. They think it's all roses, it's all a spiritual world, everything's nice. My experience isn't reality. There are two spiritual realms, and, you know, going into the Christian perspective. But the point is that if you've got your head above the clouds all the time, you know, your feet are dangling below the clouds with no direction where they're going. And I think for me, I've learned, as I just said 10 minutes ago, life's got its problems for all of us. I need to have my family on the ground, and an ordinary state of consciousness is what is needed, because that's what God's given me. And there's a life to face in this state of consciousness, and whatever lies beyond will happen when that time comes, hopefully in a timely fashion. Yeah.
All right, mate. Well, thank you very much for coming and being so open and honest and sharing your experience, Anthony. I think I really enjoyed talking about that. And I guess anyone out there listening that's in recovery, that's thinking about that stuff, you know, make sure that you're doing your own work, make sure that it's right for you, make sure that you're safe. And, you know, it's always good to know that if things are not going so well, that you find someone that you can go and talk to and be honest with. And I think it's always good to have a guide. It's always good to have somebody there that cares about you, your confidant, someone that in life that, and again, none of us get very many of these kind of people, but the people that you want to be talking to are the people that want nothing from you except your well-being. And they're the people that you should listen to and speak to and keep close, because you don't get many of them in life. But I say that again, the people that only care about your well-being, they want nothing but the best for you. And make sure that you got them around you if you're going to do anything. Anyway, thanks everyone for listening to the podcast. I hope it's useful.
Thank you.
If you want to leave any comments or ask any questions, we do our best to give you as much information as we can. Thank you very much for listening.